She's going to hop on once she's done, but let's talk a little Cavs before Didi, or we're not going to get
Do we have
to?
to? I'm so disappointed about what happened last night.
I feel like we do have to talk about it
Jay,
at
that
least
was
a little
so
bit
weak.
ahead of.
Jay just airballed from like 8 feet.
I'm 0 for the show.
He pulled a Darius Garland.
What happened to us last night? I know
Good.
I went to bed. I didn't see the whole
watched
thing,
it.
but I watched the highlights this morning and I read a couple game recaps. And McNuggets, you sent the line, some of the notes from the box. So they lost 127-120. If you would have told me before the game that they were going to shoot at 53% from the floor, over 43% from three-point range, this was the most stunning stat in a regular season basketball game I've seen in a long time. The Kings had 2 offensive rebounds all night. 2.
That's incredible.
Crazy.
Donovan Mitchell had 38 points, and they lost by 7. What the hell happened?
Game was close. They got off to a horrible start. Like they did no energy. And the defense at the point of attack was poor. They just kept getting to the lane.
That's the first time I've seen just bad defense.
Yeah.
And so is it the West Coast legs? Is it, it's not like it was back to back.
No, I mean the West Coast trips are a grind.
They're tough.
And it's not going to get any easier. Now you got Golden State. You come home for one. The first game home off a West Coast trip is brutal, and then they're right back out to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So they're in the teeth of it, or they're getting to be in the teeth of it. Last night it felt to me like they were just trying to outshoot their mistakes. Did not play well defensively. Got in a big hole early, and then Donovan just tried to outshoot them, tried to shoot them out of it. And
Garland had a
it
bad
just didn't
night.
work. Yeah, he did have a bad night.
He's playing. Is he sick?
Yeah, he was under the weather last night.
He's had 2 in a row. He got 2 in a row. I thought he played the fourth quarter of the game against the Clippers. He threw the ball away a few times. He looks, and I get it. This was going to happen anyway. Like you said, Jason, he just looks indecisive because I still don't think they understand where they fit in it. I think sometimes they have a propensity to play iso ball a little bit, or just run pick and roll, high pick and roll. And, sometimes, that ball movement that we were seeing with Donovan Mitchell when Darius wasn't there, it's easier to play with less talent sometimes. It's easier to say, okay, well, I got Jetty. I'm going to take this shot. But when you're still trying to figure out where you go, I just think sometimes they get bogged down a little bit.
I think they're 2 really talented players, and they're going to figure it out. So I preface everything else I'm going to say with they are going to figure it out.
Yeah. In some regards, they already have.
Yeah.
But then this happens. You're like, what happened?
But the caveat is.
Well, no, I was just like, my one hang-up on the Donovan trade in the first place was, man, Darius played so well last year with the ball in his hands. Just let him go. Just put the ball in his hands and let him go. And we saw it with Colin and Darius, and they couldn't figure it out. Like it was a tough pair. And then as soon as Colin was removed from that is when Darius flourished. And so my point was like, just don't mess with a good thing. Just leave the ball in Darius's hands. And so some of that clunky. Now listen, is it the eye? Is it the fact he's sick? It's just a couple of bad games.
Yeah.
And there's too much talent. I do think they'll figure it out. But it is an adjustment for Darius now playing without the ball in his hands. And the Cavs at the time of the trade, I've said it multiple times on the show, the Cavs like, listen, it's going to be fine. We have a bunch of metrics that Darius is great with the ball out of his hands. He's going to be just fine. And I do think they're going to figure it out. I think this is an adjustment period for Darius. Now, again, going back to not always having the ball in his hands, not always making it go, Donovan's going to have the ball a lot. And it's just an adjustment for Darius to get back to that. And I think eventually they will. They are going to figure it out. This is the growing pains of putting 2 ball-dominant guys together.
Yeah,
Do you think there's an issue with the close, like in the Clippers game, right? Donovan had it cooking, right? And it looked like Darius was, usually last year you wouldn't have cared because those are the shots he's going to take. Sure. He needs to shoot the ball. But it seemed as if a little bit where it was one of those things where you would like to see Donovan get a couple more shots if he has it going. And I don't know if JB is monitoring this, but I think it is important to say that maybe he may need to stagger him a little bit, maybe get him one guy on the court at one time, one guy on the court another time. But in the crunch time, do you think it's pertinent that they have to have a guy that says, this is the dude who's going to initiate in crunch time?
It's going to be Donovan more times than not. Occasionally it might be
But
Darius.
he doesn't always have to do all the lifting.
No, he doesn't. But to this point, he has. Like it's always been
Well, in the
Donovan.
Clippers game, he took one shot the last 7 minutes, and you saw what happened.
Right. Right.
You
That's
cannot
true.
blow a 13-point lead
that
in
was
4 minutes.
right.
You
That's
can't
crazy.
do that.
Last night it was more defensively than anything,
Yeah.
and JB said after the game they played arrogant and to think that they can just they've gotten off to these slow starts lately, and they think that they can catch up later, they can make it up
Yeah.
later, and that goes back to this team plays so hard all the time. You can steal wins just by playing hard, but that includes the first quarter. And
you
a
can't
lot
dig
of
yourself that big a hole.
no, they're not at that point yet. A lot of veteran teams that play for April, May, and June that have had a lot of playoff success, you can get away with bad first quarters. You can get away with playing hard, 5, 6, 7 minutes a night. I've said this before, but the Cavs title team contenders, you could watch it. Like when I watched them every night, you could watch, okay, here they go. Like they're going to play hard for these 5, 6, 7 minutes, put the game away, and then it's back to cruise control.
Right.
This team is not at that level. They can't get away with doing stuff
No.
like that.
And I'm glad they're not.
Yeah.
You don't want to rest on that
Right.
and rely on that. But it
Right.
almost feels like last night when they fell down big, they had a good third quarter, but I think they took so much energy digging out of that
Right.
first half hole.
Right.
They didn't have it when they needed it in the fourth quarter. McNuggets?
2 things real quick. I mean, they were only down 6 points at the end of the 5 points at the end of the first quarter, so it wasn't that
Yeah, but I think
that big of a hole. They
what
were
was it
down
at
double
halftime?
digits a little earlier.
Yeah,
At
but-
halftime it was 9.
Yeah.
It wasn't crazy.
No, but
it was what we talked about
You don't
yesterday.
want to. You don't
They've
want to
given
have
up
to
60.
dig out of it.
They've given up 60-plus points 3 straight games.
That's
in the
what's
first half.
concerning to me. What's concerning to me was I thought that this team looked great defensively at times during the first 10 games, and last night it seemed like defense was
Well,
optional.
it's what we
and-
talked about yesterday. We wanted to see them come out and
Yes.
not overlook it, but not overlooking something either because Aditi had to push her hit back a sec. We got Bull on. So, Bull,
good.
I know
Okay.
you watched the game yesterday. What were your thoughts on the Cavs dropping their second straight on the West Coast trip?
Yeah, guys, good to see everybody. Good to see G back in
What up?
studio.
Good to see you, Bull.
And I'm glad. I hope you're feeling a little. I know you're feeling a little better.
How are
I know
you
you're
feeling,
not
Bull?
totally better,
You,
but-
you, you
good?
back up to full strength?
I'm like 95% better.
Oh, good.
But
Good.
fortunately, G didn't have COVID, so he can come back as soon as he's feeling better.
Right.
Because I had COVID, even though I'm doing better, I got to. I won't be able
Sure.
to come back in studio until Tuesday, assuming I test negative twice. But in terms of the game, guys, I actually watched it this morning. I could not stay up, so I DVR'd the game, and I didn't look at the score, and then I watched the game this morning. Yeah, obviously it was a terrible performance, and Darius Garland just, had one of those days. I'm not worried about him at all. But I think you have to balance, right? Because we all know, and Jason, you know this better than anybody from covering the league, that the NBA regular season really, even for a team like the Cavs, I don't think it means that much. Like on a game-in, game-out basis, we have such a football mentality in this town that sometimes we react to basketball and baseball games like they're football games, which you can't. But I think in the same vein, it was interesting, as you said, Jason, that both Donovan Mitchell and Coach Bickerstaff made the point of saying, yeah, you don't want to make too big a deal of it, but you want to correct the mistakes you're making because that, if you don't correct mistakes you're making and you just say, well, it's, November in the NBA, who cares? Then eventually those become habits.
That's
and then
exactly
it becomes
what I
a
was gonna
problem,
say.
right? When the games do really matter. So
Right. It's
this
not that-
taking it easy. Go ahead.
Well, no, what you were saying earlier about the regular season doesn't really matter. I disagree with that because this team hasn't accomplished anything. And the regular season is about building the right habits and building good habits. And you can't start falling into bad habits thinking, oh, it's okay, it's only November, we got plenty of time. Because I've said repeatedly on the show, the postseason is nothing like the regular season, and that's true. And the regular season has no bearing on the postseason, and that's true. But this is a young team that outside of Donovan has no playoff experience, so they need the regular season to build those habits, to be in close games, to understand how to defend, how to initiate Darius and Donovan to play together. So it sounds like it's doublespeak, but I'm trying not to be, that the regular season has no bearing on the postseason, but the regular season builds the habits that are necessary for the postseason. So they need to take this seriously. This team hasn't
Jason,
done anything.
to
They
that
made the
point-
play-in last year. So
Yeah.
what?
Well, to your point, that's why the regular season this year is so important.
Yes.
Because last year, the lesson that they learned was they went hard, and after the All-Star break, it was they went stretches where they couldn't find offense, and they missed the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I would think that they would be looking at this regular season and say, okay, focus for 82. It's a full, you got to run through the tape. And then when you get to the playoffs, then you can start learning those lessons. But they learned a valuable lesson last year, I hope.
Yeah.
In that they took for granted they
guys-
were going to be a playoff
guys-
team, and they were not.
Yeah.
Let me clarify. Let me just clarify what I meant exactly. What I mean by saying the regular season doesn't matter is this loss specifically to Sacramento in November doesn't really matter.
Correct.
Of
Just like
course,
the
the
wins over
things.
Boston.
No, in the
don't
micro,
matter.
you're right. But we're talking in the macro. I think
Yes.
the macro of the season, there are some lessons they have to learn, and they do need to play like it's a big deal, because it is.
Yeah.
Not every night, but in the macro, I think it is.
No, I agree with you. I just think what I mean more is just like, I think sometimes people react to this game like the loss to Sacramento is not going to come back to haunt them this season, like the Browns loss to the Jets could come back to haunt them, right?
But you got 82 of these.
But you want those to start building the good habits instead of the bad. And JB's point about them being arrogant in first halves, as you said, Jason, this team has no right to be arrogant about anything because they've accomplished nothing.
Right.
We know they have a lot of talent, but as a team, they have zero accomplishments. So, and I don't think they actively were being cocky about it, but I think the way he put it makes a lot of sense.
Bull, I'll throw this out to you guys. For me, I look at a lot of different training, and I'm not saying that wars or armies are the same as sports, but the other day I was watching, people go through Navy SEALs training, right? And they talked about how many people they have originally, how they sleep basically 3 hours in about 5-6 days. They're treading water, doing all this crazy stuff, right? And it doesn't really have anything to do with necessarily with their craft. What they're trying to do is get mentally and psychologically prepared to push yourself at a limit where you don't think you can go. And I think sometimes in college, you do that conditioning and you lift these weights, and I look back on it and say, how the heck did I even survive? And the reason you do survive is because they've built that mental toughness in you that when you have to do something physical that long and you go past the point where you don't even think you could wake up or do it no more, and you pass it, it builds something in you. So when I look at the Cleveland Cavaliers and the way they play the game, JB is right. They need to instill the defense, the want to, and it takes someone being mentally prepared to do it rather than physically. Because this one thing that we all know they can do it physically, but the mental aspect is, can you push past walls? Can you say Sacramento is the same as Golden State and I'm going to play as hard as I can defensively? That takes mental and intestinal fortitude to do that. And it's hard sometimes to instill that into young players, especially if they're winning. If you win a couple games and you don't play the right way, you don't play the way you're supposed to, or the standards are there, when you win those games, it's a false sense of security. Like, oh, I could do that. I get, life is about delayed consequences or delayed success. Like, you ain't gonna get beat today, but you will get beat doing that if you continue to rest on that and go play good teams. And so I think that's where the rubber hits the road.
I don't think the Cavs. No, I didn't know you were going directly to me, but I don't think I'm not the basketball expert. Jason's the basketball expert, but I will answer the question. I don't, and maybe I'm being silly here or naive, but I don't think that the Cavs. I don't think they didn't play well because they thought it would be easy to beat Sacramento. I don't know. I don't think this team is that overconfident at this point. Do you guys think that? I just think they had a bad night for whatever reason.
Bull, you're right. They did. It's just, to me, it's a team. It's a team they should have beaten. And I do think there might have been some peek ahead. They might have been thinking more about the Warriors than perhaps the Kings. And if you do that in the NBA on the road, particularly on a West Coast trip, you're going to lose. These guys get paid too. And they came to play last night. And they just – the other thing, too, is that defense takes effort. And there's a lot of want to that goes into defense. And maybe they weren't thinking that, Bull, but subconsciously they're knowing we're on a West Coast trip. We got a big one against the Warriors last night. Let's do enough to get by with the win. And if you play 48 minutes that way, you're going to lose. You need to be more aggressive than let's just do enough to get by, save a little bit for the Warriors game moving forward. Because last year, the one mistake I thought they made, Jason, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. When I was watching them in December, I was had an ongoing conversation with another buddy of mine who's a huge NBA fan, who's not a Cavs fan but was watching them a lot. And I kept saying to him, I'm stunned at how hard we're playing defensively. Mm-hmm. There's a cost to pay for that in March and April because you only have so much fuel to burn. And I thought they needlessly burned it on a lot of nights where I think some of the veteran NBA teams were looking at the Cavs going, oh, that's cute. They think this matters, and they're playing really hard defense. We'll see you in April, or maybe not.
And that's the point I try and make all the time is last year when the Cavs beat the Bucks at home, it was a sound beatdown, and everyone was like, yes! And the Bucks are like, all right.
Yeah.
And
see you in April.
So,
yeah, right.
So there, and that's the point I think we were trying to make earlier about the difference in the regular season and postseason, why regular season results certainly don't matter. It's about the process and about the habits and everything else. But ultimately, like, it was a bad game. They got off to a great start this year. These are young kids. They hear everything. They hear everyone throwing flowers at their feet. Mm-hmm. And I think they got caught up in a little bit. And
it's easy to have happen.
They just beat LeBron. LeBron comes out. They didn't play well that half.
And LeBron sang their praises in the post-game news conference.
So now they're like, oh, this easy. We about to get this money out here, too.
You know what? They make it all good with a win over Golden State.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good team.
Even though, guys, the reality is I know they're a better team than this, obviously, but they're playing terrible basketball right now, the Warriors.
Right. Well, that would scare them. That actually scares me. Because we know what they're capable of.
They're 4-7, and they've lost, I think, 7 of the last 8 or something like that.
But
7
again,
of 9.
that's a team that knows May and June, and they don't care a whole lot about November and December.
True, Jason, but Klay Thompson's not the same player anymore. Right? I mean, is that fair to say?
I didn't hear you. What'd you say?
I said Klay Thompson's not the same player anymore. Isn't that fair to say?
He's had a ton of injuries.
Yeah, he's not the same.
His body's probably not the same. I think that's fair.
Jordan Poole's coming off the bench. I would probably start him. I don't know Klay would come off the bench. Steve Kerr's talking about we might need some changes. But, I mean, they got guys. I mean, Jordan Poole, they just gave him that money. He looks like he's a guy. I don't know how much you will lose defensively.
They're a team. They're a franchise in transition.
Yeah.
And we know about the Draymond thing.
They've got some big decisions to make.
They can't afford to keep everybody.
That's right.
Even the Warriors and even the Bay money, it runs out at some point, and it gets the luxury tax, especially with the repeat offender status that we've been talking about on and on and on. This is what the Cavs are trying to avoid. They have a lot of young guys. They got a long window here of success, but at some point, even the wealthiest owners, they feel it, and they got to start making some really hard business decisions.
You got to write some pretty big checks, and you can run from that for a while, but it's going to catch you, and it's caught the Warriors for sure. All right, Bull, stand by. We're going to come back to you in a little bit, but